A prideful young woman humiliates a poor elderly woman in public, unaware that the woman is her billionaire fiancé's mother. What follows is a powerful journey of consequences, self-discovery and redemption, as she learns that true class is measured by character, not wealth. This is a story of pride, downfall, and quiet redemption. Sit back, open your heart, and watch until the very end, because this is more than just a scandal. It's a lesson in what truly makes us human. It was a warm Saturday morning in the heart of the city. The streets buzzed with noise, cars honking, music playing in the distance, and the soft clinking of spoons against mugs in a busy cafe. Sophia Adams stepped out of Cafe Bliss, holding an iced caramel latte in one hand and her phone in the other. She looked flawless. Her fitted designer jumpsuit shimmered slightly under the sun, her long lashes blinked slowly behind dark shades, and her walk was confident, even proud. Everything about her said, "I've made it." People glanced her way, some in admiration, others in silent judgment. But Sophia didn't notice, or maybe she didn't care. As she walked towards her car, a frail elderly woman stepped gently into her path. The woman wore a simple, faded gown. Her slippers were worn thin. Her scarf was tied loosely, grey strands of hair peeking out. Her face was old but calm, the kind of calm that comes from many years of struggle and patience. She raised her hand slightly. "Please, my daughter." Sophia stopped immediately and pulled her arm back with disgust. "Don't touch me," she snapped, loud and sharp. "Is it every day you people will keep embarrassing yourselves?" The woman looked confused but kept her tone soft. "I didn't mean to—" "Keep your excuses," Sophia shouted. "I just stepped out of a cafe, not a rubbish dump. You people are the reason this city looks dirty." Heads began to turn. A waiter stood frozen by the door. Two university students nearby paused their conversation. Sophia wasn't done. "You're lazy. That's why you're begging. You should be in the village farming yams, not hanging around the city making people uncomfortable." The woman lowered her gaze but tried again, gently. "My daughter. I think you misunderstood." "I said don't call me that," Sophia yelled, her voice rising. She turned sharply and began walking away, shaking her head in irritation. But the old woman, still calm, stepped closer again. "Please, it's not what you think. I was just trying to—" That was when Sophia lost it. She spun around and before the woman could say another word, kicked her hard in the leg. The woman stumbled and fell with a gasp. "Young lady, I think you have gone too far," a young man shouted from across the cafe. A lady nearby rushed forward to help the old woman, but Sophia raised her hand to stop them. "Don't interfere," she snapped. "I'm just teaching this old beggar a lesson. Maybe next time she'll know her place." Gasps filled the air. A teenage girl raised her phone and hit record. A cafe worker looked on in disbelief, gripping the tray in his hand. Sophia adjusted her sunglasses, flicked her hair back, and walked off like nothing happened. The woman remained on the ground, wiping dust from her wrapper, not angry, not shouting, just quiet. Too quiet. And the crowd remained frozen in place, unsure which was more painful, the kick or the way the woman had been spoken to like she was nothing. The street had calmed again, but the silence at Cafe Bliss still lingered long after Sophia walked away. The old woman slowly reached for her scarf and tied it back over her head with shaking hands. Her knee ached, but she didn't groan. She didn't argue. She simply dusted herself off, her eyes soft but tired. Just then, a black SUV pulled up quietly near the corner. The door opened, and a tall man in a suit stepped out. "Madam Grace," he said with worry in his voice, rushing toward her. "Are you okay?" The old woman nodded gently. "I'm fine, Samuel. Let's go home." He helped her into the car, careful not to press her leg, then shut the door and walked around to the driver's side. As the SUV pulled away from the cafe, people on the street watched in surprise. Someone whispered, "She has a driver?" But no one had answers, just questions and the video they had captured. Inside the car, Madam Grace looked out the window, her face calm but her heart heavy. She said nothing as they drove past traffic, street vendors, and tall buildings. 30 minutes later, The car slowed down at a large black gate guarded by security men. As they saw the SUV approach, the gate opened without delay. They entered a quiet, beautiful compound with trimmed green lawns, flower beds, and a white 3-story mansion standing proudly at the center. Banana Island. The car stopped at the front of the house. A woman in her 30s, dressed smartly in a navy blue outfit, stepped out from the entrance. She had been waiting. "Madam, what happened?" she asked, hurrying down the steps as Samuel opened the door. Madam Grace gave her a small smile. "I'm okay, Lara. Help me inside." As Lara and Samuel supported her up the stairs, Madam Grace winced slightly but never complained. Inside the house, the floor was shiny marble and the chandelier above the living room sparkled. Yet Madam Grace walked straight to a simple couch in the corner, the one she always used. Lara brought a soft footstool and helped her sit, then knelt down to check her knee. "It's just a little bruise," Madam Grace said quietly. "Don't make a big deal out of it." "But Mama, who would do this to you? Do we need to call Boss Anthony?" "No," Madam Grace said quickly, shaking her head. "No need to disturb him." She looked out the large window beside her. The city stretched far beyond the glass, bright and loud, a world that moved too fast, spoke too much, and listened too little. For a woman whose son was one of the richest and most powerful men in the country, Mama Grace lived with a quiet spirit. She wore simple clothes, cooked her own food, and still carried a small leather Bible everywhere she went. The mansion wasn't her dream. It was her son's gift, and she was proud of the man he had become. But today had left a small crack in her heart. Not because of the bruise on her leg, but because of the cruelty in that young woman's voice. The pride, the disrespect, the loud insult meant to break. Madam Grace leaned back, closed her eyes, and let out a tired breath. She had seen a lot in life. But something about that moment, that face, stayed in her mind like a whisper refusing to fade. The sky above Banana Island had turned a soft orange as evening crept in. Inside the mansion, warm light filled the living room, bouncing gently off the cream-colored walls and polished floors. Anthony Williams sat on the edge of a grey velvet sofa, a tablet in his hand and a stack of documents spread out on the glass table in front of him. He wore a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. His face, calm and focused, held the kind of strength that came from discipline and drive. At 32, Anthony was one of the country's youngest and most successful tech entrepreneurs. Founder of Technova, a rising star in Africa's digital world, he had built the company from scratch, first in his dorm room, then in his uncle's shed, and now in a glass tower with hundreds of employees. But none of it, none of the fame, the success, the money, would have been possible without his mother. She had raised him alone, after his father passed when Anthony was only 7. She cleaned houses, sold akara in the mornings, and took on laundry jobs just to pay his school fees. She never remarried, never complained, and never let go of his hand, even in their hardest days. So now, in his wealth, Anthony held her like treasure. He looked up when he heard the soft click of the main door. "Mama?" he called out, standing quickly. Madam Grace stepped into the living room. Her scarf was damp, and her gown stuck slightly to her frame. Her shoes were dusty, but her smile, it was still there. "Mama, your leg. What happened?" he asked, walking toward her with concern. "I'm fine, my son," she said, brushing off her wrapper gently. "It's just a little rain and small wahala from outside. Nothing serious." Anthony frowned and helped her to sit down. "Tell me, did something happen?" She hesitated for a moment, her eyes meeting his. Then she smiled faintly and shook her head. "I just met someone today. A woman. Rude, proud, careless with her words, but it's nothing to worry about." Anthony watched her closely. "Did she hurt you?" Mama Grace's fingers touched the edge of her scarf. "Not in a way you need to be concerned about. Let's just say, some people speak without thinking." He sat beside her, quiet for a moment. "Do you want me to look into it?" "No," she said firmly. "Let the lesson find her on its own. I'm not broken, Anthony. Just a little tired." He nodded slowly, knowing his mother well enough not to press further. If she wanted to share more, she would. He looked down at her swollen leg again, concern still in his eyes. Next time, please let Samuel go for you. Mama Grace smiled. I needed fresh air, and I missed the market smell. The tomatoes at the supermarket are too clean. They don't taste like home. Anthony chuckled softly. Only you would say that. She laughed lightly, then looked at her son, truly looked at him. You've done well for yourself. Only because you did well for me first, he replied. Madame Grace reached for his hand and held it gently. In that moment, everything was silent. The tech company, the deadlines, the noise of the big city outside. Just a mother and her son, breathing in the quiet strength of each other. After a pause, Anthony stood. Let me get you tea. You need to rest. As he walked into the kitchen, she sat back with a soft sigh, her mind drifting briefly to the cafe, to the young woman in heels and sunglasses. She closed her eyes and whispered quietly, almost to herself, may life teach her what pride has blinded her from seeing. While Anthony poured hot water into his mother's favorite mug across town, Sophia Adams was pacing angrily inside her own apartment. The room was spotless, cold, and full of shine. Marble tiles, white furniture, and a large flat-screen TV that hadn't been turned on in days. But even with all the beauty around her, Sophia felt restless. She threw her designer purse on the couch and kicked off her heels. Rubbish, she muttered. Nonsense. She picked up her phone and dialed quickly. Tony, she said as soon as he picked up. Anthony's voice came through calm and soft. Hey babe, everything okay? Sophia scoffed. You can't imagine the lowlife I met today. Some rude old-smelling beggar tried to approach me outside the cafe like we were mates. I was just trying to enjoy my coffee and she stood there in my face, sweaty, wrinkled, and acting like we were equals. Can you imagine? There was a pause on the other end. Sophia, Anthony said slowly. How many times have I told you not to insult elderly people? Oh, please, she snapped. Tony, I was already upset and she made it worse. I just needed to vent. I'm serious, he said. You'll grow old one day too. Respect is something we all owe, not just expect. Sophia frowned. So now I'm the bad guy? She grabbed my hand. I was being nice by even standing there for a few seconds. And here you are lecturing me instead of just being on my side. I didn't say you're wrong to be upset, Anthony said carefully. But your words, they matter. Sophia rolled her eyes, her voice cold now. You know what? Maybe I shouldn't have called. Soph. She ended the call before he could finish. She dropped the phone on the table and sank into the couch, arms crossed, heart pounding. Why wasn't he defending her? Why did he always act like she was the one who needed to change? She sighed, staring blankly at the wall. Then, her thoughts drifted, all the way back to Aragunle. A dusty street, shouting from neighbors, the smell of frying groundnut oil in the air. A much younger Sophia, then still Sophia Adamu, walked barefoot to school. Her uniform was second-hand. Her mother, a tired but kind woman, braided her hair that morning and kissed her cheek with pride. Read well, her mother had said. One day, you'll rise. And she did. Despite the noise, the hunger, and the insults from richer kids, Sophia studied hard. She won a scholarship to Unilag and made her mother cry tears of joy. In university, she kept her real name low. Adamu reminded her of Ahigunle. Adams felt cleaner, neater, easier to say, more classy. She graduated top of her class and got hired at Titan Tech as a junior developer. At first, she was humble, quiet, always early, always grateful. But things changed. Her clothes changed, her walk changed, the way she talked to the security guards and janitors changed. Then she met Anthony. It was during a team brainstorming session. She had impressed him with a fast fix on a failing payment code. He was charming, brilliant, and powerful. She caught his eye, and before long they were having quiet dinners, then open dates. Then everyone at the office knew Sophia was dating the CEO. That's when the arrogance fully came. She stopped greeting older staff. She yelled at interns. She laughed loudly during meetings and interrupted people mid-sentence. When a cleaner accidentally bumped into her in the hallway, she hissed, "Do you know who I am?" But no one complained, because to them, she was already the boss's wife. She began to see herself differently too, not just as smart, but chosen. She imagined herself walking beside Anthony at awards shows, shaking hands with governors, smiling on magazine covers, a society queen in the making. And queens don't stoop to greet beggars. Sophia blinked back into the present. Her apartment felt too quiet now. She looked at her phone again but didn't call back. She stood up slowly and walked to the mirror near her hallway, stared at herself, long lashes, full lips, smooth skin, everything she had worked so hard to become. She whispered to her reflection, "I deserve this life." But the echo of Anthony's voice played again in her mind. "You'll grow old too. Respect is something we all owe." She quickly shook off the thought. Later that evening, the air in the mansion was peaceful. The lights were soft, and the sound of cutlery clinking against plates filled the dining room. Madame Grace sat at the head of the table, wearing a fresh wrapper and a clean scarf tied neatly over her head. Her earlier encounter at the cafe still rested somewhere at the back of her mind, but she chose not to speak of it again. Across from her, Anthony sat with a small smile on his face. He had made vegetable soup himself, just the way she liked it, thick and full of green leaves. "Anthony, my son," she said gently, "you're not getting any younger. When will you finally settle down?" Anthony smiled, lowering his spoon. "Mama, you won't stop asking this question, will you?" "I won't," she said, wiping her fingers with a napkin, "because I want to dance at my son's wedding before I need a walking stick." He laughed softly, then leaned back in his chair. "I've been seeing someone." Madame Grace raised her eyebrows, surprised but curious. "Really? Who is she?" Anthony thought for a moment, then said slowly, "Her name is Sophia. Sophia Adams. She's flashy, confident, very intelligent. You'll probably meet her soon." Madame Grace nodded silently. She didn't show any reaction, just folded her hands in her lap. "You've been quiet," Anthony said. "Don't you want to ask more?" She smiled gently. "If she's someone you care about, I'll wait to meet her myself." He stood and walked to her side, kissing her forehead softly. "Thank you, Mama. I want you to like her. I just want you to be happy," she replied. The next morning, Sophia's phone buzzed while she was doing her makeup in front of her giant mirror. "Tony, can you come over for dinner tomorrow evening? I want you to meet my mum." Sophia's hands froze mid-stroke. Finally. She had waited for this moment for months. Anthony always spoke so highly of his mother, how strong she was, how she raised him alone, how she shaped his values. Sophia knew this meeting wasn't just another date. It was a test, a door. If she passed, wedding bells were next. She quickly typed back, "Sophia, of course, baby. Can't wait." As soon as she dropped the phone, she jumped to her feet and began pacing. "What should I wear?" she whispered, already opening her wardrobe. Her designer gown spilled out. Silk, satin, sequins. "No, not too shiny," she murmured. "She's an African mother, classy, but respectful." She grabbed her phone again and opened her favorite boutique's page. That evening, she spent over 300,000 on a fitted lace gown, new heels, a gold purse, and a hair appointment. She wanted to be unforgettable. She needed to be perfect. As she lay in bed that night, freshly waxed and exhausted, she smiled to herself. "Tomorrow, I meet the Queen, so I can become one." But what Sophia didn't know, what she couldn't imagine, was that the Queen she hoped to impress was the same woman she had insulted, yelled at, and kicked just days ago. The next evening, Sophia arrived at the mansion. A sleek black car dropped her at the gate, and she stepped out in her expensive lace gown, her makeup done to perfection, her perfume floating softly in the air. She clutched a gold purse and stood tall in glittering heels. The house looked even more beautiful in person. Wide pillars, warm lights glowing from inside, and trimmed flowers dancing gently in the breeze. A maid opened the door and Sophia stepped inside, her eyes wide. It smelled of wealth, clean floors, soft lighting, and calm music playing from somewhere in the background. Then someone came down the staircase. Sophia looked up and paused. It was an older woman in a simple gown and a neatly tied scarf. No jewelry, no makeup, just quiet presence. The woman walked toward her with slow, graceful steps. And in that moment, something pulled at Sophia's memory. That face, the scarf, the eyes, the wrinkles. But no, this woman can't be the same person. Or was she here as a maid? She wondered. Possibly, but she didn't look like the one at the cafe. Still, "Welcome, my dear," the woman said gently, her voice calm. "Thank you," Sophia replied stiffly. She offered a small, uncertain smile, trying to keep her balance in her high heels. For a second, she tilted her head, trying to place the face. The woman didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't mention anything. And Sophia quickly told herself, "I'm overthinking. That poor beggar can't be the same person, no way. Impossible." Just then, Anthony walked in, smiling. "You're here?" he said, kissing Sophia lightly on the cheek. She smiled and held his hand. "Mama," Anthony said, turning toward the older woman, "this is Sophia, my fiancé." Sophia felt her chest flutter. He said it, fiancé. Her eyes sparkled. Madame Grace nodded with a soft smile. "You're welcome." Sophia smiled back, trying to study her face again just for a second, but the woman's expression was so polite, so composed, that it threw her off balance. If this was really the beggar, wouldn't she have reacted? Wouldn't she have said something? As they sat at the dining table for dinner, Anthony helped serve the food himself. Madame Grace moved quietly, pouring drinks, arranging plates, and saying very little. Sophia noticed how the staff all respected her. She kept glancing at her now and then. Was it the way she held her spoon? Was it the calm in her voice? Was it the silence? Sophia shook her head. No. She would have said something. She would have shouted. She would have reacted the moment she saw me. She would have stopped me from coming close to her son. She took a deep breath. It's not her. It can't be. And with that thought, Sophia finally relaxed in her seat, smiling confidently as Anthony placed his hand gently on hers. Meanwhile, Madame Grace sat at the far end of the table, watching Sophia closely. Sophia looked calm on the outside, smiling, nodding at Anthony's words, sipping from her wine glass, but Madame Grace could see through it. The way her fingers tapped the edge of her plate, the forced laugh, the shifting eyes. She was nervous, and she should be, Madame Grace thought quietly. She never imagined the world could be this small, that the same young woman who kicked her on the street, who shouted in public and called her names, would be sitting in her son's house wearing lace and perfume, calling herself his future wife. The shock had hit her hard when she opened the door and saw that face again. But she had made a choice in that moment. A hard one. She wouldn't explode. She wouldn't confront her. Instead, she chose composure. She chose silence, the kind of silence that watches, the kind that listens deeper than noise. And so, the dinner continued, with smiles, short conversations, and a heavy silence wrapped in politeness. And just like that, it ended. A few days later, Anthony invited Sophia to a private dinner at a quiet restaurant on the island. It was cozy and beautiful, a place surrounded by trees, candlelight, and soft music. But Sophia barely noticed the setting. Her eyes lit up only when Anthony showed her photos of something on his phone. "A new house," he said, smiling. "Still under construction, but we're getting there." Sophia leaned in. "It looks nice." Then she frowned. "Wait, is that marble in the bathroom or just tiles?" Anthony paused. "What?" "The tiles," she repeated, squinting at the photo. "I hate cheap tiles. Marble or nothing, babe. Don't let some contractor embarrass us." Anthony didn't respond immediately. He just stared at her. She didn't notice. She was already scrolling through the other photos. He watched her fingers swipe left, swipe right. So quick, so certain. And then a quiet thought entered his mind. A thought that had been bothering him more and more lately. Earlier that week, he had walked into the office unexpectedly and found Sophia yelling at one of the older staff members, a man who had been at Titan Tech even before Sophia joined. She was waving papers in his face, throwing them at his face, calling him useless for submitting a report 5 minutes late. The staff had stood there, head bowed, saying nothing. Anthony hadn't said anything either. Not then. He had told himself maybe she was just being firm, making sure things were done right. Maybe she was under pressure. Maybe she would cool down after. But deep inside, it hadn't sat well with him. He remembered how many times he had tried to talk to her about the way she treated people, the drivers, the cleaners, even the receptionists. And each time, it turned into an argument. "You're always correcting me, Tony. You never take my side. I'm not rude, I'm just honest." She never saw herself as wrong, not once. So he stopped bringing it up. He kept quiet, hoping she would see it on her own. But as she sat across from him now, concerned more about bathroom tiles than how people were treated, something shifted in his chest. He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. Sophia looked up. "You're quiet. What's wrong?" Anthony shook his head. "Nothing, just tired." She nodded and reached for her wine glass, not thinking much of it. But in Anthony's heart, a quiet warning bell had started to ring. The next morning, Anthony sat in his office, staring at the large window in front of him. The city skyline blinked with sunshine, but his thoughts were cloudy. He had barely slept the night before. Too many thoughts. Too many small things that didn't feel so small anymore. A soft knock interrupted his silence. "Come in," he said. James, his assistant, rushed in holding a phone in his hand. "Sir, I think you need to see this." Anthony frowned. "What is it?" James hesitated. "It's trending. All over social media since this morning." He handed over the phone and stepped back. Anthony pressed play. The video began. A woman in a fitted jumpsuit, designer sunglasses, loud voice, sharp words. "You people make the streets stink. Go back to the village where you belong." Then came the kick. The crowd gasped. The phone in Anthony's hand almost slipped. His heart stopped. He couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. Right there, in full color, clear audio, and in front of the whole world, was Sophia. And the woman she was yelling at, the one she insulted, the one she kicked, was his mother. The woman who gave birth to him and suffered to see him grow and become the man he is today. His chest tightened with rage, his jaw locked. He stood up slowly, trying to control the storm building inside him. "Cancel all my appointments, I'm going home." James nodded and rushed out. Anthony picked up his phone and dialed. Sophia answered quickly, cheerful as always. "Hey, baby. Come to the house, now," he said firmly. The line went quiet. "Oh, okay," she replied, confused. "Is everything all right?" But Anthony had already hung up. It didn't take long. Sophia arrived at the mansion wearing a fitted wine dress and a full face of makeup. Her heels tapped lightly on the marble floor as she stepped into the living room. She was surprised to see Madame Grace seated quietly on the couch, dressed in her usual simple wrapper and scarf. "Good afternoon, Ma," Sophia greeted, forcing a nervous smile. No reply came. Then Anthony entered the room, phone still in hand. He didn't smile. He didn't even sit. He stood before her, his face unreadable. He tapped the phone screen. The video began to play. Sophia's eyes widened. The room began to spin. There it was, her voice, her insults, her anger, and there was the woman she had mocked, the same one now sitting quietly in front of her. Her knees gave way. She collapsed onto the floor, trembling. "No, no, 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 please. I didn't know," she cried. "I swear to God, I didn't know it was you." Madame Grace looked at her calmly. No hate in her eyes, just quiet disappointment. Anthony's voice was low but sharp. "That's the point, Sophia. True character shows when you think no one important is watching." Sophia wept harder. "Please, I was just upset. I thought she was—" "You humiliated my mother," Anthony said. "You humiliated yourself." Madame Grace spoke then, her voice soft but steady. "I wasn't begging," she said. "I had just arrived. My driver was parking and I thought I'd step into the cafe to get a croissant. Then I saw you coming out. I admired your confidence, your posture. I liked how you looked. She paused. I walked toward you to say hello. I never imagined you'd think I was filth. I never imagined you'd tell me not to call you daughter because I looked old and poor. Sophia covered her face. I'm sorry, she whispered. I was wrong. Please forgive me. Anthony stepped forward, his voice lower now. I don't need a woman who only respects power, he said. I need one who respects people. Sophia sobbed quietly, shaking where she sat. But the decision had been made. Anthony turned and walked away. The silence that followed was louder than any shouting could ever be. The engagement was over. After Sophia left the mansion that night, head down, heels silent against the marble floor, Anthony stood by the window, arms crossed tightly. His heart burned with anger, not just at Sophia, but at himself. He turned to his mother, who sat quietly on the couch, folding her scarf neatly like nothing had happened. Mama, his voice broke a little. Why didn't you say something that day? Or at least the day I brought her home and introduced her to you? Mama Grace looked up, her face gentle. Because some things are not worth it. Anthony frowned. What do you mean, not worth it? You were kicked, in public. You came home with a swollen leg. She smiled sadly. I didn't want to be a reason for your happiness to fall apart. I thought if you loved her, maybe I could find a way to forgive it quietly. Maybe she would change. He walked closer, his voice rising. But you were in pain. You didn't deserve that. I've been through worse, she replied softly. Being poor teaches you silence. Being a mother teaches you sacrifice. Anthony dropped to the armrest beside her and held her hand gently. I'm sorry, he whispered. I should have seen it earlier. The way she spoke to people, the things she said. I ignored the signs. She patted his hand. Now you've seen clearly. That's enough. The next day the storm hit. The video of Sophia shouting and kicking an old woman at the cafe had now reached every corner of social media. Millions of views, thousands of comments, angry hashtags, #Sophia Adams exposed, #respect your elders, #pride before the fall. People didn't stop at the video. They started digging. Screenshots of her rude comments to junior staff. Clips from old interviews where she boasted about her lifestyle. One user posted her old school records revealing her real name, Sophia Adamu, not Adams. So she denied her own father's name to look rich, and now she's insulting poor people? Another wrote, first-class degree, zero class in character. This is why you don't forget where you came from. She grew up in Ahigunle and now acts like she was born in Paris. It only got worse. Titan Tech released an official statement. They had terminated all employment and association with Sophia Adams due to her behavior being in direct conflict with the values of the company. Just like that, her access card was deactivated. Her office email was shut down. And all the friends who once followed her like shadows, gone. No calls, no messages. Her phone, once filled with notifications and admiration, now sat cold and silent on the table. Sophia returned to her apartment that night. It felt colder than usual. She dropped her bag and sat on the edge of her bed. There were no flowers on the table, no surprise calls from Anthony, no team messages, no glowing screens full of "you're amazing" comments. Only silence. Only regret. She looked around the room she once filled with designer bags and scented candles. Now it felt like a museum of someone who didn't exist anymore. She walked to her mirror and looked at herself. Same face, same skin, but nothing inside was the same. She whispered through tears, I lost everything, because I thought I was better than everyone. The first-class degree couldn't save her. Her fake name couldn't protect her. Her rich fiancé was gone. She had become the latest example of a saying she had once mocked. Pride comes before the fall. She sat alone in her apartment, the lights off, the windows closed. Her phone hadn't buzzed in days. No calls, no invitations, no job offers. She sat on the cold floor, knees pulled to her chest, and stared at the mirror across the room. Her reflection stared back, same lashes, same lips, same face, but it didn't look familiar anymore. Then, the memories came, one by one, like scenes from a movie she wished she could pause. She saw herself shouting at a cleaner who forgot to refill her water bottle, laughing at an intern who wore off-brand shoes, telling her old friend from school, "I don't keep people who can't upgrade their circle." She had treated people like they were small, disposable, invisible, and now she was the one no one saw. The next morning, Sophia took a long bus ride to the outskirts of town. She hadn't been there in months. The neighborhood was noisy, dusty, and smelled like fried yam and kerosene, but it was home once. Her mother's apartment was on the second floor of an old building, cracked walls, rusty rails, but the same wooden door and warm scent of palm oil stew from the kitchen. She knocked. Her mother opened the door, wiping her hands on her wrapper. For a moment, she just stared at her daughter. Then she stepped aside quietly. Sophia walked in and stood there, unsure what to say. Her mother looked her over from head to toe. "You look tired." Sophia nodded. I came to say sorry." Her mother didn't yell. She didn't hug her either. She just sat down and said, "You didn't fall because life hates you. You fell because you forgot where you started from." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "You changed your name. You stopped calling. You stopped sending support. And I didn't complain. I watched you on TV and prayed for you. But inside I worried. Because pride, my daughter, can't fill a hungry stomach." Sophia sat beside her and wept. Her mother gently held her hand. "But if you're ready to start again," she said, "then start small and start right." A few weeks later, Sophia began working again. Not at a big firm, not at a glass building with company cars, a small tech company in a rented office with 4 rooms and an old water dispenser. She wasn't a team lead anymore, just a junior developer. Her desk wobbled, her chair squeaked, and her monthly pay was barely enough to cover rent. But she said, "Thank you." The first day, she greeted everyone by name. She offered to help interns set up their systems. She shared her lunch with the office cleaner who always came in tired. Some of the younger staff whispered about her behind her back. "Isn't that Sophia Adamu? The one who got fired?" She used to be someone big. But she didn't argue, she didn't defend. She just kept working quietly, humbly, one line of code at a time. She had tasted pride. Now she was learning grace. And for the first time in years, she was becoming someone even she could respect. 2 days later, the air was quiet that morning. A soft breeze rustled the trees outside Café Bliss, the same cafe where everything had gone wrong weeks ago. Sophia stood across the road, wearing a plain blouse and black jeans. Her hair was tied back simply, and her face carried no makeup, just tired honesty. She crossed the road slowly, her feet feeling heavier with each step. Her heart beat faster the closer she got to the glass doors. As she walked in, the sound of cups clinking and soft music playing filled the space. The staff behind the counter looked up and froze. They remembered her. One of them, a waitress named Tolu, set down a tray slowly. His eyes were full of quiet caution. Sophia stepped forward, then stopped. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I know. You probably don't want to see me," she said. "But I came here today because I owe you something." The room stayed still. "I want to apologize for everything," she said, her voice cracking. "The way I spoke to you all, the way I treated that woman, the way I acted like no one here mattered." She looked around the room, her eyes meeting those of the staff who had once watched her shout like a queen. "It wasn't just embarrassing," she said softly. "It was wrong." She paused, then added, "I wronged all of you. But the one I hurt most was Madam Grace, and I pray sincerely that someday she can forgive me. No cameras, no fancy clothes, no followers, just truth." She stepped back and bowed her head slightly, then turned to leave quietly. But before she could reach the door, an older woman at one of the corner tables stood up slowly. She wore a neatly tied scarf and a soft, curious expression. Sophia? Sophia turned around, startled. I knew your face, the woman said. I'm a friend of Madame Grace. We go to the same church. Sophia's eyes widened. I saw everything that day, the woman continued, and I've never seen her that quiet after being insulted. Sophia lowered her head. But I'll tell her, the woman added, her voice gentle, that you came, that you said sorry, that you meant it. Tears filled Sophia's eyes. Thank you, she whispered. The woman nodded once and smiled faintly. One step at a time, my dear. That's how healing begins. 3 days after the public apology, the sky was turning orange as the sun dipped behind the buildings. Inside her tiny apartment, Sophia was finishing up work on her laptop. The room was quiet except for the soft humming of the old standing fan in the corner. She had spent the last few weeks trying to rebuild, not just her career, but herself. Then came a knock. She frowned, checked the time, and stood up slowly. She wasn't expecting anyone. She opened the door. Her breath caught. Standing there was Madame Grace. Her scarf was neatly tied, her hands calm by her sides. But it was the scarf that made Sophia freeze. It was the same one she wore that day at the cafe. Sophia's lips parted, but no words came out. Madame Grace looked at her gently and said, May I come in? Sophia quickly stepped aside. Yes, yes. Please. The apartment was small but neat. Madame Grace looked around once, then sat down on the only clean cushion by the window. Sophia offered her a cup of warm tea. They sat in silence for a moment, the air between them heavy, but not cold. I saw the video, Madame Grace said quietly. Your apology. A friend of mine showed it to me. Sophia lowered her eyes. I never asked you to say sorry, she continued, but I watched the way you spoke, and I saw something in your eyes. Sophia blinked nervously. Madame Grace looked at her gently. I saw a woman who finally sees people, not their clothes, not their shoes, just people. Sophia's lips trembled. I can't forgive myself for how I treated you. You don't need to, Madame Grace replied. That part is mine to give. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. She looked down, holding her cup tightly as one tear rolled down her cheek, then another. You hurt me, Madame Grace said. You did. Sophia nodded quickly, tears falling freely now. But, she continued, I see the change in your eyes, and that is enough for me. Sophia covered her face with both hands and wept silently. Not the loud, dramatic kind of crying, but the soft kind, the kind that cleans you out from the inside. Madame Grace reached across the table and touched her hand. They sat like that for a while. Quiet, peaceful, no shouting, no lectures, just the calm warmth of grace. A cup of tea between two women, one healing, the other forgiven. A week had passed since Madame Grace visited Sophia's apartment. The scarf, the tea, the quiet forgiveness, it had changed something in Sophia, not just outside but inside. She didn't smile as loudly anymore, but her eyes were softer, her steps slower. Her heart was lighter. She hadn't heard from Anthony since the engagement ended. Not a message, not a call, not even by accident. And she didn't expect one. That same afternoon, far across town, Anthony sat beside his mother on the balcony of the mansion. The sun was high and the breeze was gentle. They sipped fresh orange juice in silence. There was peace in the stillness, but also something unsaid. Anthony finally broke the quiet. You visited her? Madame Grace nodded slowly. I did. She told you the truth? He asked, his eyes fixed on the garden below. She did. He looked down. I haven't said a word to her since that night. I didn't know what to say. Madame Grace reached into her phone and opened something. I didn't bring it up, she said, handing the phone to him. But you should see it for yourself. Anthony took the phone and pressed play. It was the video of Sophia at Café Bliss, standing in front of the same workers she once insulted. But this time, her voice was calm. Her head was bowed. Her words were honest. She didn't cry. She didn't perform, she just apologized. Not with grand speeches, but with truth. Anthony watched the whole thing quietly, not saying a word. When it ended, he handed the phone back. "She's changed," he said, more to himself than to his mother. Madame Grace didn't answer. She simply stood up, kissed her son's forehead, and walked inside. Some things were not hers to fix. That evening, back in her small apartment, Sophia sat on the edge of her bed, typing a message on her old phone. She stared at it for a long while before pressing send. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to thank you for teaching me. Even through pain, I've learned, and I'm trying to be better. That's all I wanted to say." She dropped the phone beside her and took a deep breath. No reply came. And that was okay. 2 days later, she returned from the market, arms full of groceries. As she dropped them on the table, she noticed a white envelope sitting on the floor near her door. It had no name, no sender. Just elegant gold edges and a soft shimmer. She opened it slowly. Inside was a folded invitation card. Titan Tech 10th Anniversary Gala. Friday evening. Formal. Private guest list only. She stared at it for a long time. Her hands shook slightly. No name, no explanation. Just a quiet door. Opening. Friday evening came faster than Sophia expected. She stood in front of her mirror, wearing a simple navy blue gown, no sequins, no flashy jewelry. Her makeup was soft, her hair pulled back into a neat bun. It wasn't the kind of look she once dressed for. It wasn't to impress anyone. Tonight, she was dressing with humility, not with pride. She took a slow, deep breath, picked up the invitation, and walked out the door. The Titan Tech 10th Anniversary Gala was held in a grand hall glittering with lights and chandeliers. Music played softly as guests in expensive suits and gowns filled the space with laughter, clinking glasses, and conversation. As Sophia stepped through the wide glass doors, the noise dimmed for a moment. Heads turned, whispers began. Is that her? She really came? She used to be his fiancé. But Sophia kept walking, not with her chin raised high in arrogance, but with quiet grace. She greeted the staff politely, smiled at the security man, and found an empty seat at the side of the hall. She didn't try to be seen. She was just present. The evening moved on. Speeches were given, photos taken, past achievements celebrated. Then Anthony Williams stepped onto the stage. The room fell silent. Wearing a sharp black suit, he looked every bit the tech mogul he had become. But his eyes held something deeper, something quieter. He took the microphone and smiled briefly. 10 years ago, he began. Titan Tech was a laptop and a dream. Today it's a home for hundreds of brilliant minds. I'm proud of what we've built. But tonight I don't want to talk about apps or growth charts. He paused, looking out into the crowd. I want to talk about something else. Something we don't print in newsletters or post on LinkedIn. He took a deep breath. Character. The room stayed still. I've seen people rise fast, faster than they imagined, but forget who they were. I've also seen people fall, and instead of blaming the world, they got back up and chose to grow. Sophia listened, her hands clenched gently in her lap. Success isn't just what you build, Anthony continued. It's how you treat people, especially the ones who have nothing to offer you. That's where true greatness starts. There was a pause. Then he ended softly. And sometimes, growth deserves another look. The hall stayed quiet for a second longer, then filled with applause. Sophia didn't clap loudly, she just smiled, a soft, grateful smile. Not because of what he said, but because she understood exactly what he meant. The applause still echoed softly through the hall as Anthony stepped down from the stage. Sophia looked away, unsure if she should stay or quietly slip out. But then, he began walking toward her. His steps were steady, not rushed, not forced. He stopped in front of her. Sophia slowly stood up, her heart pounding. For a moment they just looked at each other. No anger, no bitterness, just quiet understanding. Then Madame Grace joined them. She stood beside her son, her scarf neatly tied, her eyes warm. She looked at Sophia and then at Anthony. With a gentle nod, she gave him permission, not to fix the past, but to acknowledge the growth. Anthony turned to Sophia. "I may not love the woman you were," he said slowly, "but I respect the one you've become." Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. She didn't beg for another chance. She didn't reach for his hand. She simply nodded, her voice steady. "Thank you for seeing me now." Madame Grace reached out and touched Sophia's shoulder softly. Then they both turned and walked away, mother and son. And Sophia? She stayed for a few minutes longer, then left the gala quietly. Not as a fallen star, but as a woman finally at peace. A few weeks later, her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. "Hello?" she answered. "Sophia," came Madame Grace's familiar voice. "There's something I'd like you to see." The orphanage sat just outside the city. It wasn't fancy, just painted walls, dusty floors, and rows of children with curious eyes and big dreams. Madame Grace met her at the gate, smiling. "This is where I spend most of my time now." Sophia followed her in, speechless at first. Children rushed toward them, hugging Madame Grace, calling her Mama G. That day, Sophia sat with them, told stories, listened to their hopes, and shared her own lesson. Kindness is the only luxury that never fades. She began visiting every week. No cameras, no social media. Just small hands holding hers and bright eyes watching her face. She didn't do it to repair her past. She did it because finally, she understood what it meant to be someone others could trust. Sophia never asked Anthony for a second chance. She didn't wait for him to call. She didn't try to prove herself anymore. She had lost the relationship, but in its place she found something far more valuable: herself. Moral of the story: kindness is the only luxury that never fades. Respect should never be reserved for the rich. It defines who we are when no one's watching.